Hello, welcome to today's show, Radiant Realization with Namrata. Here we deep dive into captivating conversations about life. Today I have with me Liana. She is certified sexualogical bodyworker, rebirthing breathwork practitioner. And we are going to talk about sex and intimacy and how that can enrich life. Welcome, Liana. I'm pleased to have you today on my show.
Hello, Namrata. I'm really happy to be here, and hello to everybody watching.
Liana, when I read about your profile, I got really excited about the work that you are doing in this field, which has been lot unspoken and not part of mainstream for past couple of years, but now it's coming on mainstream and people are openly talking about. What I would like to know from you is what got you started to pick this as your niche and help people open up about which was never spoken for ages.
Well, it was also related to my personal life. I had some struggles, and at a certain point, I wanted to learn, and I couldn't do it in a healthy, beautiful, and exclusive relationship. So I said, okay, what other ways are there? I'm going to start reading books. And in one of the books that I was reading, at the very end, last page, like very last page at the very bottom. Thank God I have this habit. I don't know, like probably not a healthy one, but I read all the way to the very last page. And that's where I saw a link to the Sexological Bodywork certification. And my reaction was, what is that? It was in a PDF, and I was reading on my laptop. I clicked on it. The website was really old school, like really old school, no photos, just texts and these columns of texts and old kind of menu and all of that. It was really like when I finally got to the certification, everybody was making fun of the website at the time. But what attracted me to it was that it was coaching around sexuality, and it was somatic coaching, practical, applied, actually concrete coaching, not talk. I'm a person that prefers to do things rather than talk about things or plot things or plan things. So I'd rather just do it. So that's what I liked about this entire certification. So when I started, eventually, it took me 2 years to raise the money because for my revenues at the time, it was very expensive. So I had to put money on the side. And in my case, it took me 2 years to put all the money on the side. And then I got to the certification. And at a certain point during the certification, because I wasn't really sure, am I going to be a coach, a sex coach or not? After an intensive 10 days of learning all about intimate massage and going through all sorts of practices, our teacher told us the following. You're going to go home now after these 10 days in which you've done nothing else but just learn about techniques, giving them, receiving them, having talks around what was going on. And you're going to go back to your life. And the inertia of your life is very, very powerful. If you are not careful what you do, slowly the inertia of your life can draw you back to where you were. So when you go back home, please be aware and make whatever change, however small it can be, so that you can maintain this level. So I got back home and I was like, okay, I can't exactly produce a relationship in the way that I wanted to right now. But what I can do right now is start building a community. I was doing that with environmental activism. So I said, okay, I'll just do that also. There was a big reaction in my country because I wasn't the famous person here, but I was pretty much known with my environmental activism. And I was the president of an environmental NGO. I had funded it also. And people around us, like the ministries and embassies partners and companies partners from our country, when they saw my videos, they were like, what is the president of that environmental NGO doing? Talking about genital massage, intimate technique, orgasm, foreplay, afterglow and all of that. And eventually the talk was that intense that I had to step down from that place and just resume to doing sexuality coaching. Yeah, it was not an easy switch, like not easy, it was painful for me, but at the time I didn't have any other kind of support. Like nobody was conceiving that the president of an environmental NGO could also do sexuality work. So I told myself, okay, I'll just start doing this. So here I am. This was 8 years ago, not that long
And
ago.
uh, adequate time for you to get that confidence, for you to get adequate clients, good testimonial. Yeah, good enough.
Yeah, it was a bumpy ride. We were talking before we started the live that it was a bumpy ride. It wasn't easy for me. Technical stuff are still not easy for me, but in the beginning, there were the reactions of people, like how people understood it, the rumors, because up front, whenever I would go socializing, they were either quiet. I was going to networking events, and can you imagine? People were introducing themselves as accountants, lawyers, fast-moving consumer goods entrepreneurs, and there I was, the sex coach, the only weirdo in the room, and everybody, either they were silent and in shock, or they would burst laughing and they would think that it's a joke. And I was like, no, this is not a joke. I actually do sex coaching. And after 2 years, I gave up the networking events because I just felt like it felt strange to keep seeing those reactions. Those were grown-ups, and I didn't feel comfortable in that scenario. So I said, what, maybe I'll take a break from networking events and I'll just focus on doing my work, building my social media to the best of my abilities, filming vlogs, because that's what I do, filming programs, finding videographers with whom to film. Whenever I film a program, I actually have to go to somebody that's a specialist in video, sound, lighting, editing, because for the love of God, I can't do that. And I'm also a big klutz when it comes to building my website and all that. I had to find somebody also to help me with that. Like technology basically was the biggest struggle for me. The actual work, so much easier compared to handling people's reactions, or like in society, and I don't want to talk about my family because that was a different discussion, or simply the technological requirements. And now with AI and everything, I feel like I was born in the wrong era somehow. Like maybe I was supposed to be born like in the 19th century or something. I'm not sure how I ended up in the 20th century. I was born in the 20th and working in the 21st, and with all this technology, I'll have to go to somebody to do massive induction when it comes to technology. Otherwise, I won't be able to keep up. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's how I ended up here today. I did want this. I didn't realize, like, the actual work never scared me, but the other stuff were really a challenge. Sometimes some people's reactions did scare me, but that was like once or twice when I heard rumors got to me eventually from my country, and something that was very, very unpleasant. It reached me, and I was like, wow, I can't believe grown-ups just don't have the understanding, some grown-ups in my country, of what sexuality coaching is. But yeah, that was several years ago. This is no longer going on right now, so thank God for that.
I think Gen Z is more curious and excited to have people like you who could guide them and open their eyes to know what is right and what is correct way of enjoying, bringing that pleasure to your partner and to yourself.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sexuality is supposed to be beautiful. And the actual sessions that we have, I work mainly with women. Yeah, they are beautiful. Sometimes people come when they almost break up, and I'm like, my thought is, what have you done until now? Why didn't you come to me earlier? But I never tell them that. It's just my thought, because they're in too much pain for me to say that. But some of those cases I need to send them to therapy, because it's more than just the sex problem there. There's an overall issue in the relationship. But otherwise, the sessions, except those cases, are beautiful, fun, exciting, practical. Even if we do them online, like I have them doing practices. Or we make a plan and then they do practices and then we get back and I take them through the rundown of questions of how did it go and checkups, and it's, yeah, I'm very meticulous about it. But it's still fun.
Liana, in your experience, what are the common myths that couples have when it comes to sexuality and intimacy, and that would help them grow as a couple?
So the first one is sex should just work. Why do we have to plan for it? Why do we have to work around it? It should just work. I'm just going to list them and then we dive into them a bit. The other one, we should be as hot about it and as passionate as we were in our teens. And our hormones in our teens are not the hormones in our 30s or 40s or even later. So that's another myth, that we're supposed to be like that all the time. And the third one, if you're stuck with something, just get a bunch of toys or get a bunch of sexy clothes and those are going to fix it. Yeah, so these are the three most frequent ones that I see. Then on some occasions, some people that come to sessions, they expect, let's say that the one person has a higher libido, they expect the other person to have the same level in their libido. Otherwise, there's something wrong with the other person. That one's not as frequent in my concrete sessions, but it still happens. So we're going to unpack them a bit here. So first of all, it should just work. Well, it's a myth because not everybody is actually 100% compatible. Some people are so lucky, that they work, their bodies naturally flow, they have the same patterns of arousal, and if arousal works, everything else works. But that's not the majority. So that's why it doesn't just work. People, when they have different blueprints, they need to put in some efforts to work with themselves and also put in some effort. It doesn't mean that it's like lifting 200 pounds, but some efforts to make sure that each individual, like each of the beloveds in the discussion, is turned on properly before they go ahead. So it doesn't mean that it has to be this overwhelming work, but it needs a bit of attention. So that's why it doesn't work for everybody. And it's not the biggest problem on the planet. Secondly, that you're supposed to express sexually as if you were first starting out, okay, a teen, when your hormones were all over the place. It doesn't work from two perspectives. One, hormones change throughout the years. Two, the more we grow up and the more responsibilities we have, the less energy there is for intimacy. Sometimes even less time. So it doesn't always look, especially with married couples that are married for 10 years or even more, it doesn't look like in the beginning because one, there's routine there. Two, your hormones are shifting throughout time. Three, if you're working like crazy and you have a big family and you go to a lot of social events and you love those, but they also consume your energy. So when you get back home after a lot of parties and a lot of work and a lot of networking and a lot of running errands, you want to go to bed, and sleep, not have sex. So sadly, sometimes you need to plan it. It sounds unromantic, but at least you need to plan physical intimacy. And if you plan it right and if you're in the right place, yeah, sex can also happen. It's not mandatory. And the third one, that both partners should be on the same level of libido. Well, sometimes it is the case. There are some lucky people out there who marry the person that is turned on as frequently and as intensely as their partner. But those are exceptions. In most cases, there's a gap in the libido. And sometimes the gap, it's not always that the male libido or the man's libido is higher and the woman's is just way lower. Sometimes it's vice versa. If the man has overworked himself or is just running a lot of errands for his family of birth and his family when he married into it. So sometimes a man can be so overworked that there's no energy. Other times, maybe something happens emotionally in their lives, and this does take a toll on libido also. So you just, there are too many factors that can impact your libido aside from your natural hormonal level, that you can't really realistically expect everybody to be on the same level. Basically, those are the most frequent ones.
When couple experience different sexual preferences or sexual desire, how do they navigate through these differences so they're happy?
Yeah. So my recommendation is always, when you start dating and you get intimate and you kind of sense that you're wired differently and you're turned on by different things, that is the best moment. As soon as you become aware of this, that is the best moment to at least talk about it, like curiously ask, hey, what's your preference and what does it do for you? Like, try to understand when the visual cue or the sound or the touch, whatever it is, what exactly it produces for them. Keep it exciting and let them share from their excitement, and try to find in those moments common ground. And if you can't, because sometimes it's just you're too much into that discussion, then maybe a sex coach can be like, I also do that in sessions. Whenever couples come to me with this discussion, I send them questionnaires. They get 5 pages of questions just around sexuality. That's how we work here. But also in a session, I start, either we do the session with both of them, or I do 2 individual sessions. And in either case, I ask them about, okay, let's start looking at what turns you on, and I try to describe them or get their descriptions as detailed as possible. And then there's the strategic work of pairing those, of finding mutual ground and trying to find as much mutual ground as possible, because it's not always a perfect fit. Okay, we are human. So and that usually, the pairing up requires 1 or 2 sessions or more, and it requires a lot of homework for them, which is supposed to be juicy anyway, but it depends on what reactions they also have when they hear, because sometimes people are a bit ashamed of all the stuff that they have, and sometimes they withdraw or just don't share, keep some for themselves. And whenever they have the courage to sharing their different turn-ons, the other person is like, what? Sometimes like, what? Really? And usually that kind of a reaction is like, okay, let's breathe, let's take it slowly, let's unpack this, let's see what you can take from it as much as possible and all of that. So sometimes it's just bringing all the tension down and finding mutual ground through just mediation in a way, although I'm not a mediator, but just only those small things. And usually this is much better done in the beginning than further down the line. Because if you hold this one and you don't share it, and you accumulate some frustration there, the more time passes, the more that's going to grow. And you can end up with it bursting at a certain point in whatever ways. Some people cheat, which is not pleasant, but it's usually because there was not something really shared there. Other people just start reproaching, or in a fight, this comes up and the other person is like taken aback. It's like, you never told me this. And so there's a lot of ways in which, if you don't do this discussion in the beginning, or as soon as you realize that there's a different turn on, it gets more difficult to navigate it in a pleasant way. So yeah, that's how it is. Some things you do talk out, or some things you play in a safe space, in an informed space, just to find out, okay, of those lists of arousal from every person's party, or each person, how many of these can we actually work on, try out, maybe enjoy, who knows? So yeah, it's a lot of, if you do it in the beginning, it's fun and exciting. If it's further down the line, it can get a bit tricky.
In your experience, have you noticed people who've gone through trauma in past? How does it impact their sexual health going forward when they plan to get into a new relationship? Or
Yeah, this one is deep. So I guess you've heard this already. A lot of people have had various kinds of trauma. From a psychological stance, there are many ways in which you can be traumatized, not necessarily subjected to the most horrific things. There are smaller things that can also be considered a trauma because they're not natural to the human being. So a lot of people, even developmental trauma, like you were slowly guided by your parents to do something that maybe wasn't natural for you, but they were doing it because they wanted you to be in a certain place when you grew up, have a certain position, standing, and so on. So in that, there's the likelihood that people have trauma is very large. Not necessarily big trauma, but some. So the first thing that is important to realize, has this person realized that they've been through trauma or not? If they haven't, they might not even be aware that it has an impact on their life. Okay, so if they're not aware, there's nothing to work on. Like they don't even show up for coaching, for therapy, for anything, because they are not aware. It's just, it doesn't cross their mind. They think that this is who they are and this is how things should be. So that's one way in which it can impact you without realizing. Again, it's not necessarily a big trauma, just something that was less intense but still affected you and your libido and your confidence, even if it didn't completely destroy it, but it may have lessened it. That's one. The second one, let's say that they went through something or they witnessed something that affected them, and it affected their relationship to their body, their confidence, and even their confidence to express pleasure, their confidence to make a request about something that is pleasurable to them. So it can impact basically how they show up in the relationship. Some people are aware, again, of this. Others, they just think that that's how they are, a bit more introverted or shy. If they are aware and they start working on it, things can gradually improve. Up to what point, it depends on the individual, on their body and their psyche, their emotional capacity also to deal with all the transformation process, the relationship that they're in. So there's a lot of stuff that is also involved in that process. And let's say that somebody went through very ugly things, okay? Abuse, ugly, ugly things. In those cases, yeah, they are aware that something is wrong, even if they can't express it all the way, but they are aware. People around them know, they see it. They usually go for help, support, therapy. But with those cases, a lot of times either it can manifest as they don't want to seek any relationship anymore, or sometimes it can express as them seeking partners that resemble, they fall into a pattern. So they sometimes, when we went through a traumatic event, we tend to repeat the thing until we realize that, okay, this kind of person, this kind of way of speaking to me, the fact that in a relationship maybe I don't have such a, not a strong word, but just I don't have room to make a request. I don't have a say in the decisions. All I do is please the other person, but I don't get as much pleasure or stuff that I need, and so on. So sometimes this pattern becomes obvious, and the people, even if they went through really ugly things, they can break through and get out of that. So that does happen. It takes more work. Those people are heroes from where I stand, but it can happen also. So yeah, sometimes how it can impact you, you repeat a negative pattern or you stay away from it completely. And then sometimes you can just break free and get a more steady, harmonious life, not necessarily an exciting one, but one that is soothing for you. So that can also happen.
And now you said like a lot of people have gone through traumas, whether they're aware or not aware, but there is a base level of trauma which most individuals would have gone through. So in this case, as a couple, what can a spouse do to hold safe space for the partner so they can open up in a non-judgmental environment and there is a free flow of discussion about needs and expectations?
So how to do that? Well, first of all, it starts with how much you love the other person and how much you can feel, like sense or smell. I usually say how you can smell the other person, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, kind of get an idea, and just be able to pick up from the interaction. This does take time because you don't just build this overnight. Build an interaction, first of all, based on what cues the other person is giving you, even if they're not aware. How much energy they have at a given time, what they like, what is going on in their life overall, because there needs to be understanding also that sexuality isn't disconnected from the rest of the life. Okay, so if something difficult happens, let's say at work or with their parents or with your parents, this is also going to impact how you show up for intimacy, depending on how impactful it is, psychologically or emotionally. That safe space where you can express and just simply be, first of all, that is based on first really loving the other person and then having the ability to sense them. And also with those, because I think those are important. Otherwise, if you don't love the other person and if this person doesn't love you back, I think it's more challenging to build a truly supportive and nurturing space where you can be freer and more powerful, erotically or sexually. So when that is ensured, reciprocating love, observation, first of all. You observe the other person. And if you can't be sure, ask. Or if you are asked, let's say that your partner asks you because they're not so sure, they kind of sense that something's going on, or that maybe you need something else, or that maybe there's something that you want to say but you're not saying it. You might be asked, I don't know what is, like, maybe there's something here differently that you want. Is that true? Or am I picking it up right? Or what would you wish? Like, you can start with constructive questions. Basically, this is what we do in coaching also. Like, if the person isn't used to asking these kinds of questions or answering them, you get to practice in coaching sessions with somebody that is not your intimate partner, but somebody that is there to support you to start opening up and asking questions or in answering questions that you're getting in a way that is freeing for you or liberating for you, but also understanding and sensitive towards the other person. Those are, I don't have very complicated answers, like they're just 3 ingredients, but in my opinion, those are more valuable.
Agree. Now, how can couple explore their sexual desire at the same time set boundaries together? So it's a harmonious relationship.
That one does require a bit of self-knowledge. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of experience, like with a lot of people in the past. Sometimes what you can do, let's say that one person marries a virgin, you can go for a coach or a therapist and start to open up about this discussion. And with a coach, you can also get exercises that you can try at home, and you can start to realize, okay, what works for you and what doesn't. Or they can give you exercises, stuff to read, stuff to watch, stuff to listen, because you got a lot of sensory stimulation there. And you can find out for yourself what works and what doesn't. I mean, you can still take a learning approach even if you don't have experience. Like, that's one of the things that's the best way to use coaching. So after you get some knowledge about yourself, there's the time where you, again, like with the preferences, you share about why that works for you and what that doesn't work for you. Those would be the boundaries. And there's usually, this one isn't naturally done in couples because it can be very, very delicate, especially if they didn't have any sexual education prior. So sometimes either a counselor, a coach, or a therapist can help. Even if, let's say, one person shows up for a session, it can still help to give insights to that couple about how to handle boundaries, discussion, and so on, and how to recognize. Because sometimes you might not know that you have a boundary because there's something that maybe you never tried, maybe you had never heard of it, and the other person brings it up. So sometimes you just don't know where your boundaries are. And those are the places where you want to tread carefully, and usually guidance from somebody that will just help you realize how to pick up discomfort in your body and how to have the courage to say it in that moment without harming the relationship. That is the art, really. Yeah.
So
So, and
nowadays, uh, today we hear a lot about power couples, and there's a lot of power dynamics that goes in relationship. So in that case, how does it impact intimacy and sexual health, and also the way they interact with each other when power dynamics is the driving factor?
Mhm. So power dynamics, first of all, they can be overall in the relationship. Who has a bigger word to say overall in the relationship? And it can only happen sometimes just in intimacy. Let's say that when it comes to other areas of their lives, maybe the partners just want to divide and decide to split the decisions, like actually set this one. But in intimacy, maybe it works for some people that one person is more dominant, has the final say in something, or makes the shots, calls the shots, and the other person is just following along with what the dominant partner says. That can also be. Power dynamics can also be in terms of role play. Okay, and it's just role play and it's fiction and it just applies to the intimate area also. If both partners are into that, because not everybody's into that, for instance, but they can still be without role play, they can still have power dynamics. Somebody who is perceived as more experienced, more knowledgeable, and with more authority, quote unquote, to make a decision or to make a call in the relationship, sexually speaking. Usually when that happens, like when there's a big gap in the power of the two partners, the person that is perceived with more power usually has also more responsibility. Because if you're, usually this is the person that calls the shots and they decide to try something that is more intense, they need to be like that. That's something that I want to put out here. They need to be very, very aware and observe the other person and translate their body signs or body language. Because sometimes when they try something new with the person that is more submissive, the person may not always have the courage or the stamina to say when something is negative. So those people need to open up their eyes and really look at their partners to pick up when something may be off, so that they prevent that stuff goes really, really berserk, okay, really in a negative way, off track, off course. Okay, and for that, I usually recommend to everybody, stay away from alcohol. When you want to try stuff sexually, stay away from alcohol, because you can't really observe, there's too many steams in your head to be able to pick up what is going on with the person next to you. Usually that's when a lot of abuse or rape is reported, when there was alcohol involved. So I know alcohol is fun, but just like driving, you drink it and then you don't drive. Okay, just enjoy the alcohol, absolutely, but then take a cab home. Well, when it comes to sex, you've had alcohol, no, especially if you've had lots of it. Okay, that's really the worst thing that you can do. There are still stories coming out today, especially with the sexual revolution. People are starting to speak out against abuse cases in former relationships and so on. It's ugly. So that's how you navigate power dynamics. The one that is, in case they're not both equal there or close to equal, the one that is standing higher somehow has a lot more responsibility on their shoulder. They need to be aware of that.
I would like to know from you, what is the role of emotional intimacy in sexual satisfaction?
Well, first of all, it's not necessary for everybody. So there are some people that are just sexually driven, period. And all they want is explicit stuff, direct, straightforward, high intensity, like high physical intensity. And that's it. Whenever emotions come into play, they might be a turnoff for some people. Okay, so not everybody needs emotional intimacy sometimes. Yeah, if I were a therapist, I would probably bring in this message also. If emotional intimacy is lacking altogether or it's a turnoff, there might be also an indicator that maybe there's an emotional wound there. I won't call it trauma, just wound that needs to be addressed and that needs to be looked at. That's also the case. I'm not a therapist, I'm just a coach. So usually when I see this, I'll just send people, you might want to take a therapy session and see if there's anything there just to make sure. But there are some people for whom they're also known as demisexuals. Emotions are extremely important. I mean, without emotions, they can't even conceive to get intimate. Some call them vanilla. There's an erotic blueprint system that was invented by a Sexological Bodyworker colleague. There's the blueprint of the energetic. That's the name that she gave to them. And this blueprint needs a lot of emotional sharing and constructive emotional space in order to open up. And usually, at least with the people that I've worked with, it's women usually that tend to have the emotional component and emotional intimacy requirement much higher. So when that happens, it needs to be acknowledged as such. Because some women, if they're so pissed off at their husbands, they're not going to get intimate. And their husbands are going to be, I don't understand. It's just, I mean, you love me, don't you? You're just upset. Can we get past that and just enjoy ourselves? And the woman might say, no, because you piss me off too much. Or whatever she'll say. So that sometimes that is also the case. And I think if possible, there needs to be somehow some space there for the person to vent out their emotions. Some understanding that they're just emotions, that it's not that the person is crazy. Emotionally, they were pissed off, upset, hurt, offended, whatever happened, that somehow needs to be acknowledged also. So in that sense, even if, let's say, one of the partners doesn't have an emotional requirement there, their emotional coefficient needs to be there also, their EQ. Because if your partner needs that, it takes two to have sex, so it takes two to also handle the emotions somehow, or at least honor them in some way. It's important. So for that, again, you need to have some self-knowledge, and partners need to talk about these things. Maybe in bed with some chocolate or some raspberries or some watermelon and some beautiful music. Usually, again, in the beginning, like you want to get as much clarity as possible in the beginning when the atmosphere is still pinky and rosy and beautiful, and you can share stuff without wreaking havoc somehow. It's usually much healthier when you do this kind of exploration earlier on, even if it's just a conversation.
Now, how does trust work when it comes to deepening intimacy between partners?
When it comes to self-trust, let's say that there is a person that looks amazing on paper. Okay, they got the physical traits, the social standing, the financial standing, they're of the right age, of the right family, everything. Okay, but still, they're just not the right match for you. You would need a lot of self-trust, self-esteem to acknowledge that. Like, this person is amazing. Everything. They check every box, but they're just not right for me. Okay? Intimately, or just as how they view life. Because somebody can have all the stuff that you might externally want from them, but they don't necessarily see life in the same way that you do. Or they might just not appreciate you that much for whatever reason. So you need a lot of self-trust and self-esteem to say, okay, but I need somebody with whom I can function, and somebody who really also loves me or also values and cherishes me. Even if this person, man, woman, doesn't matter, they're great, but they're great for others, not for me. That's the first way in which you can tell self-trust. And that, for most of us, takes years to build. It's not a problem, it just takes years to build. When it comes to trusting the other person, usually you're trusting the other person that they're honest with you. Also, maybe some things they just don't want to share, not necessarily because they have something to hide, but it's just very, very personal to them. So trust also is there that for whatever reason, if they're deciding not to share something with you, doesn't mean that they're hiding something from you or that it would be detrimental to the relationship. It's just their privacy. But you trust them enough that they love you and that they're the right fit for you and you for them. So there's trust going on there to keep going and be honest up to the point where you're comfortable to being honest, and you can build a relationship there. And it's self-trust in sex or in intimacy. That one is about understanding yourself or just acknowledging your fortes and your weaknesses. And self-trust is also translated into asking for the stuff that you want in ways that they don't offend the other person. And they don't have to be complex. Like, I'm usually for the direct, simple, even if they sound a bit, I don't know, clumsy. You would rather be clumsy than beat around the bush and have the other person wondering, gee, what do they want to say, really? Like, I think it's much better of a way to be straightforward with, and that does require trust in yourself and in the other person. And then trust in the relationship sexually. Usually that comes about when, let's say that you're in society and there are other, even if you're a couple married, there are other people there. And some of them might be very appealing. You trust yourself sexually and you trust your sexual connection with your partner enough to not get jealous, to not freak out when you don't need to. Just because there are other beautiful people or attractive people on the planet doesn't mean that your partner is going to go running towards them. So that's how trust is translated into a sexual and an intimate relationship also. You trust the person, okay? And they trust you also, because sexy people come in both genders, and anybody in a relationship might find another person attractive. That doesn't mean they're going to cheat. That doesn't mean they're going to go towards that person. No. So that's how it's translated from my perspective.
One important thing is whether one important thing is how you communicate with your partner when it comes to expressing your needs, asking for what you need, understanding what your partner is requiring from you. So how does the communication dynamics work between couples in this case?
In just one word, carefully. I'm going to expand, but just carefully. First of all, I'm a big believer in nonverbal communication, because in sexual intimacy, you don't have the kind of discussion that we're having here. Never. Like, that would be a killer in those moments in the worst way possible. So nonverbal communication, that comes from compatibility, essentially. Or each person's ability to see or to perceive what is going on with the other. Okay, so nonverbal communication is something that you want to invest some time into. First of all, understanding yourself, like how are you communicating without words when something is pleasant or interesting or appealing to you, and when something isn't. And you can start with the most naive things, like you can ask your friends, hey, what does my face look like when there's a food that I don't like and we're together at a restaurant? Can you see it on my face, or do I make a sound? Does my body do something when I see something nasty in my plate? Or what am I like when I see a food that I really like? Like before I even say it, how do you tell? Like you can get even that kind of insights from your friends. And then also, obviously, you can start to, like, you can have discussions, and usually, because maybe you're aware of what happens in your body when you're in pleasure or not. And with a coach, you can start to translate those things, and you can put them on a list and get more clarity. If not, usually there are exercises and practices that you can do. And the coach, although you're not having sex there, never with a coach, but they can start to pick up what is going on with you in terms of sounds, visual expression, body movement, breath. A lot of the times the breath it changes, let's just say, and it can indicate a lot of things. And lastly, also about communication, like asking the other person, and learning to ask, because communication and understanding requires, first of all, gentle communication, asking gentle questions, not necessarily jumping to conclusions, even if it's good conclusions. It's a good way or a good idea to avoid them. And simply waiting for answers, or listening or observing. Okay, understanding comes a lot from listening, from observing, from being patient. And not many people have that, granted, but at least put in an effort there. If you love the person and they love you, if you want the person and you're crazy about them and they're crazy about you, you will put in that time naturally, because you're so magnetized towards them that naturally you're still like, everything that you hear about them, let's say that you're not yet an item, but everything that you can hear about them, every detail, every hint, you're gonna be like, your antennas are gonna be parabolic. Let's just say that they're gonna pick up 108 channels, not just one, with how it is with just people that you're not so attracted to. So you naturally do it anyway, but it's a good thing to pay attention and not let your excitement get the best of you. It's an exercise. If you're in your 20s and you're listening to this, you might be thinking, wow, this is too much, like too complicated. Just let me go out dating and have my fun. And to that, I will say, sure, absolutely. Sometimes you need some time to mature and then to come back to this one with more pragmatism. Like, in all honesty, I'm 41. So it took me a while to learn this. When I was 20, I was jumping head first into stuff. And I wasn't really, like, sometimes I would tick people, or what is it, hit them the wrong way, metaphorically speaking, hit them, or just hit something that was really painful to them. And I didn't know. And they would get annoyed, but they wouldn't say it. And I didn't know. So because I let my excitement get the best of me, and I had a lot of that, like I was a very head first person. I learned to tone that down in the past 20 years.
Okay. So, the sexuality is a lot about physical touch and everything. But how do a couple ensure that there is a lot of physical touch even during the day, and it's not just restricted to bedroom or when you are on holidays?
First of all, if your environment isn't one that supports that, it'll be pretty difficult to do that. Okay, if you live in a society where physical displays of affection are just not possible, that's going to be very, very difficult to to bring in. Like, you got to understand your social context also has a say, or your culture. Secondly, your education, because that's also important. Maybe in your culture, it's not necessarily like public displays of affection, where it could be just a hug, a small kiss, a touch on the back, or whatever other kind of small gesture of intimacy. Maybe the culture doesn't really frown upon it or look down upon it, but your education in your family, maybe it was a very religious family or just a very prestigious family and they had to uphold a certain etiquette, and those things might not be so compatible. So that's also important, and that needs to be cleared up. Usually people will say that up front. I mean, when they get into a relationship, let's say that you naturally want to hug them when you're on the street, or hold their hand, or just grab them from the waist and walk like that, or kiss them when you're out and about. And even if it's not a problem in your culture, maybe the other person does have it, and they'll usually communicate it very early on. So you kind of realize where you're standing with the other person. But if, let's say, culture supports it, your education doesn't have a problem with it, or your family etiquette or job, whatever it is, then it's just a matter of tuning into your senses, first of all, because somebody's got to be the muse there. Somebody's got to ignite the passion and the flame there. So usually it's the person that is more in tune with their body and more in tune with their senses and has the habit to express or to request stuff that is pleasing for them, or to allow pleasure to be. And when you're in pleasure, even if it's just not extremely turned on and over the top and everything, okay, but just a bit of pleasure, you naturally, if you're in love with the person and they're in love with you, you naturally go towards them, you share it, you express it. It comes natural. It's in our instinct. When we're in love, when we're attracted, hormones do their job in those moments. Now, let's say that some time has passed. Even if you're in tune with your body, whoever the person is in the couple, but it's kind of like they're kind of bored. Let's just say it like that. Or there was too much routine. In that situation, you need, or my take is, that you need an external source of inspiration. And that's where movies come into play, books come into play, music comes into play, dancing comes into play. I would also say good food here, but be mindful of your silhouette also, especially if we age, we want to stay thin as much as possible. There's a medical reason for that. Your joints, if you increase in weight, the more you age, your joints get more frail. So you don't want to put a lot of pressure for them to carry a lot of weight. This one, I got it from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He said it in an interview in the 70s. And I heard him say that the more you age, you want to lose a little more weight so that your joints are not pressured. Okay, so with food, especially when you're further down the line in a relationship, 10 years, 15 years, maybe don't play with it that much. I mean, like, that's my take on it. Don't necessarily make food your primary source of spark. But books, movies, music, dancing, physical activities, getting a coach. Okay, sometimes a coach can come up with a lot of crazy ideas. Have a woman in coaching. She's from the United States, and she's we're in our 5th year now since we've done coaching. And every year we do the 12 days of Christmas. That they have that in their tradition. So for each day 1 is Christmas Day, day 2, second Christmas Day, and all of that. So 12 days of Christmas. She wants to do something different intimately with her husband. So each year we come up with a new list of stuff to try, stuff to do. So yeah, sometimes you can use a coaching session or more to plot things and to come up with inspiration ideas. Okay, that's also a way.
And as couple grow in relationship, what is the role of self-awareness about themselves? Because even desires would change over a period of time.
Mhm. So first of all, self-awareness is very, very important overall. If you're a parent, self-awareness is extremely important because you're example for your child. If you're married for 10 years, 15 years, self-awareness is important to realize, am I still in a good place in this marriage? Am I still a constructive partner? And that, like that question, that requires a lot of courage, because we would all want to be the constructive and blameless or just spotless clean. We have no negative contribution, but it's usually not the case. Like if things go not so good, it's usually both partners, they have a role. So self-awareness is usually first used in the general, like in their life, health, social, just emotional hygiene in the relationship. And then in intimacy, self-awareness, first of all, comes from understanding within a couple what are the things that are amplifying your libido and what are the things that are killing it. I think that's the first one. Especially if you have a lot of years with that person, you kind of realize. And then self-awareness is also important because sometimes you just might not know. And it's usually called, I have a blind spot. And in that moment, I have enough self-awareness to say, okay, I have a blind spot here. I need to go and seek some external guidance and take the best possible advice and apply it to the best of my abilities and see what I can constructively change here. And also, self-awareness is with starting, especially for women, becoming aware how your body changes, especially hormones, in your libido. Because that does change, okay? In our 20s, we're in a certain way. In our 30s, a certain way. 40s, some people say that your libido spikes again in their 40s. Some people say that it goes down. That's also with hormonal balance, okay? We have bio-individuality. And yeah, in those cases, you can also go for somebody that is specialized in hormonal balance. And you can check also with health sometimes, because it can impact your libido and the beauty of your intimate life. And also self-awareness is just sometimes realizing, okay, maybe everything in our relationship changed. Maybe our marriage is different now. Maybe sexuality is not so important right now for whatever reason. How do we cope with this? How do we go about it? In some cases, that's also a discussion that is needed. Not for everybody, but it can happen. So I think self-awareness is important to realize where you are in any given moment, or who you can go to for the best possible help, and also professional one, I would say.
So taking this deeper, I would like to know from you, how can couple manage their sexual anxiety? I would say when they are starting out, or
Mhm.
also when they are with their partner for quite a long duration, the
Okay.
performance might go down. So in that case, how do they manage their sexual
Okay.
performance anxiety?
Okay. So in the beginning, when you're just anxious because you don't know the person and you want to leave a good impression, what I would say is, first of all, the second you're attracted or interested to somebody, if that you kind of have some places where maybe you're not so okay with yourself, maybe that, I don't know, not everything related to sexuality right then works for you. I would say get a little bit of education or personal growth. There are programs that you can develop, or sorry, that you can see, pick up online or study. There are books that you can read about it, and they can at least help you calm down a bit of that anxiety. You know, they can kind of give you an idea of, here are the stuff that you can do. You can get assessed from a coach with all the stuff that about you. Like, for instance, when I start coaching with somebody, I have that 5 pages of questions. We go back into their history, education, mindset, what they've done in the past, what has not worked, and in the present, where they are in that moment. 5 pages just of questions. So usually, even if you just go for something like that, it will help you to tone down a bit. Because usually, if you go for a coaching session, the coach will start to pick up things. Where are your fortes? Where are your minuses? Where are your weak points? And just through that, you get a little more clarity, and also anxiety goes down. And it also helps to know that when you're anxious in the beginning, the other person is also anxious. Like, you're not the only one there. So, you can rest assured that they know what you're going through, or they're going through the same thing, even if they don't know that you're going, or they just can't even imagine because they're so anxious themselves that they're not thinking, wow, but she's also as anxious as I am. So that's also important, like realizing that we're all human. And in the beginning, everybody's a bit nervous and they don't know what to do, or because they're exploring. That's one. And I think then also humor helps, because when you're anxious in the beginning and you're kind of a klutz and you make a mistake or you drop things or whatever, I'm not going to get too plastic here, but you kind of make some mistakes. It's okay, just laugh at them and move on with the situation or the discussion. And then further down the line, let's say that you realize that maybe there's an imbalance in the libidos, or just you're turned on by different things, you want different things in intimacy, and there's a big gap and you don't know how to fill it, how to reduce it. And yeah, at least one person develops anxiety. In those moments, I would say therapy is very, very useful, because you need a therapy. And also, I work with somatic practices. Usually the person that has developed performance anxiety needs to depressure, and somatic practices with breath work, with intense physical practices, not a workout, somatic practices. Those are different. Usually it helps the person to loosen up a lot. And those, especially for long-term relationships where there's anxiety there, those could be a recurrent practice. Usually with today's world, I recommend to everybody to have somatic practices daily or every other day. Just like meditation or prayer, somatic practices are also important. Yoga is also considered a somatic practice, for instance. Other people consider Tai Chi or Qigong somatic practice. So there's a wide palette there. I work with even simpler things. So just breath work, stretching, tapping, affirmations. So not even as complex as yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong. That's also worth mentioning there. So this is how I would go about it. And after therapy and after a foundation of somatic practices, then yeah, addressing the issue, but from a more balanced place, with your husband, with your wife.
Okay. Currently, as a couple, they face a lot of challenges when it comes to finding couple time, because there is work stress, that is parenting stress, family, external family, extended family stress. So, taking all these dynamics into their life, what can couple do to maintain their intimacy? At the same time, they can ensure that all these things are also balanced.
So how I've seen it, first of all, there are times when there's not room for intimacy. That one needs to be understood, especially when the baby is just a newborn, or up until a year maybe, the baby needs a lot of attention. There's not much intimacy that you can have. And I don't think that needs to be pushed, like, unless the man in the relationship has a very big problem with it and just can't handle it or deal with it. In those situations, maybe somebody needs assistance from a grandmother, other relative, somebody that they can trust to take care of the baby and give the couple some space to breathe, to sleep, and to reconnect physically. But I had a coaching session with a woman, and she gave me the okay to share this story. She had just given birth for several weeks, or was it months? And she had not been intimate with her husband, and she was worried that she might lose her husband. So she came to session, and I tried to find out what were her days were like and why she thought that she wasn't so open for intimacy. And she said, well, I smell all day like poop, like pee, like milk, like food. I don't feel so sexy. I don't want to engage intimately. I just want to sleep and take a shower or have a bath. That would be what I need. So, and I understand, like, there are some moments in a couple's life when there's no room for that. The baby needs the mother constantly, and the mother just, she also needs to rest. So there's not a lot of energy there. There's also a hormonal thing that happens where she's attuned to her baby first and foremost. So she's not so much, because of her hormones also, she's not so open to her man because the infant needs her. Her baby needs her. That's one. Secondly, you also need a lifestyle there. And yeah, especially when there are kids involved, support. I'm not saying pass your kids all day long to a nanny or to a grandmother, because that's not okay either. But some amount of support with house chores, with taking care of the baby, usually that's what can help. And it's not an easy job. I've had friends that were married with 2 kids, and at a certain point they couldn't find help, not even with house chores or with babysitting. So it's not easy, and that's understandable. But you can't really do everything. Like sometimes there's a saying that it takes a village to raise a baby. Sometimes it takes an extended family to raise a baby. And the parents also being able to be themselves adults, expressing intimately and sexually also. Because that's also important in a couple. So sometimes you just need help. Okay, there's not much you can do on your own. And that's what I find. Usually when couples struggle, they're just overwhelmed with tasks. And delegating or getting help, that's kind of what is needed.
Mhm. Well, Liana, what I would like to know from you now is about your program where you talk about how to reignite a sexual passion in long-term relationship and the client success stories, if you are comfortable sharing.
Mhm. So first of all, the programs that I have are on my website. Those are the video programs. And some of them are just with props. Others, I do them myself. I show them myself without being explicit. Like that was my thing. I didn't want to be a porn star. I am just an intimacy coach, so that needs to be said. But I do women's practices, and that is the most complex program. That's very recommended for women, whether they are or not in a relationship. I think being in tune with your sexuality and discovering new things is always welcome. Then I also have my Patreon community where I upload audios, very simple ones, with just somatic practices that is useful or that are useful for stressful days, intense emotions, anxiety, physical pain, also sometimes for menstruation pain, because I also have that, like menstrual cramps. There are some practices that I use. They help a lot, I swear. I've had my experience. Then I also have a book, and that one is for those that read. It's on Kindle. It's Get Your Orgasmic Intimacy. That one was based on questions that I got from the people that I worked with. And it's a bit more theoretical because it's a book. I couldn't exactly explain practices there, but there are some people who need a theoretical approach also. Lastly, I do also individual sessions for those that can go through a 5-page questionnaire. I swear it's fun. Okay, it's fun. And sometimes it's it brings a lot of clarity to an individual. Like a lot of the people that I worked with, first of all, that was one of the testimonials that I would get most often. This was the most detailed discussion that I ever had around my sexuality with anybody. And that's for coaching purposes, okay? That's for me to understand exactly where the person comes from, what they struggle with, and also for me to hopefully read in between the lines what the solutions are. And then also the discussion in coaching. That is very, very helpful, especially when you're in a predicament and you don't know how to go about a situation. Sometimes a coaching discussion also can bring a lot of clarity. When it comes to testimonials, I've had a lot, like from my breathwork events with people that either found it difficult to hold that breath for long, other people that enjoyed the guidance with the breath and the oxygen high experience that they got out of it. But one of the most beautiful testimonials that I had was a thank you letter from a coachee's husband. Like, I'm working with the woman and she turned her intimate relationship around, and then her husband wrote a text and she sent it to me, the wife, the one that I was working with, in which I was reading the thank you letter from the husband. I was like, wow. I put it on, I got it in 2021, so that was 3 years ago. And I posted it throughout several times on my accounts. I was like, this is the first ever letter that I got from a woman's husband, him saying thank you for working with my wife. Okay, it's not that the husband cheated on his wife with me. No, it's that I worked with the wife and she brought a turnaround in the relationship, and the guy wrote to say thank you. So that one was the most not a lot of husbands write back to say, I love the work that you do with my wife. Or a lot of boyfriends saying, I love the work that you're doing with my girlfriend. But this guy did. So anyway, they're Americans. I think Americans are more open to expressing stuff. So that was funny to get.
My wishes to you that you get a lot more such thank you letters, because the way you are impacting women's life is really commendable.
Thank you, Namrata. So I hope that a lot of people I'm going to stay, like, I'm going to bulge my eyes in the comment section to see what people say, like if they have questions or anything, or what they thought of this discussion. I'm really going to look forward to that. So I want to thank you for bringing me today and having this discussion. And I want to thank anybody that stuck with us all the way, because I think I talk a lot. So, I mean, I'm passionate about the work. So
That comes from your that comes out in the way you speak, the passion with which you shared your knowledge today. It really comes out. Thank you so much for being so wholehearted in sharing what all things could impact lives of people. Thank you so much.
thank you for having me.